Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening in to this demo round for the February PF topic hosted by Libertas Debate Academy. Today, a few of our debate instructors will be debating the resolution resolved the United States federal government should ban single-use plastics. On the affirmative, we have Sam Chen and Ilan Arias speaking first. And on the negation, we have Daniel Zhao and Fiona Hugh speaking second. Before we begin, for those who haven't heard of us before, we are a premier online debate camp for students this summer at 1/3 of the cost of in-person alternatives. Our talented instructors have championed over 28 national tournaments, and they've all accumulated 128 bids to the TOC. There'll be plenty of opportunities for personalized coaching and a lot of innovative drills planned for students this summer. So we would love to see you all. It's going to be a lot of fun. But yeah, with that said, we can jump straight into the round. And Sam, do you want to get started?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Cool. Everyone ready? Great. Let's start the time now. Resolved. The United States federal government should ban single-use plastics. We affirm. Contention one is the circular economy. The U.S. plastic economy is currently linear, which prioritizes a take, make, dispose approach with a focus on consumption rather than long-term sustainability. The MacArthur Foundation finds in 2023 that the use of plastics has increased tenfold in the past 50 years. 95% of the value of plastic material worth $120 billion annually is lost to the economy. 30% of plastic packaging will never be reused. Single-use plastics are the culprit. Kyogo 19 reports to curb plastic use, ban single-use plastic items. The global recycling system is estimated to be a $200 billion industry. About 90.5% of plastic has never been recycled. Single-use plastics aren't helping the economy. The MacArthur Foundation furthers, the circular economy is an economic system in which materials are designed to be used, not used up. The circular economy benefits society, the environment, and the economy. Without elimination, achieving a circular economy for plastic will not be possible. Noting, replacing just 20% of single-use plastic packaging is conservatively estimated to be an opportunity worth at least $10 billion. Circular economics solves biodiversity loss, which trickles into extinction. Forstland 22 recalls 90% of land use related biodiversity loss is caused by the way we extract resources. In a circular economy, we design out waste. The scenario can halt biodiversity loss by 2035, even if no other action is taken. This could free up 350 million hectares of agricultural land by 2050 and create 30 million jobs globally by 2030. It can help biodiversity recover to 2000 levels by 2035, safeguarding the well-being of future generations. Contention 2 is fishing. U.S. fishing is on the rise. Straits Research 23 confirms that the global fishing equipment market is resumed to expand 4.3% during the forecast period. North America will command a market with the largest share, growing at 3.5%. Noting, fishing is becoming one of the most popular outdoor hobbies, which helps the growth of fishing equipment in the region. However, these products create billions of waste products. Albergurney 23 details, fishery products are an important source of microplastics in the human diet. The production of plastics are related to the growth of the population, which has increased from 3.1 billion to about 7.3 billion and is projected to exceed 9 billion by 2050. Plastic production expected to double by 2035. Humans ingest a significant amount of microplastics through consumption of fish. Single-use plastic is at fault. Wise Angler 23 details, the use of single plastic in fishing is rampant. However, by eliminating single-use plastic, we can substantially impact the environment and prevent hundreds of thousands of tons of plastic waste from entering our oceans. This would help preserve biodiversity and the health of marine ecosystems. By preventing the release of microplastics into the food chain, a plastic-free fishing industry would help safeguard human health. Without quick solutions, single-use plastic erodes human civilization. McKnight 21 reports 100 million marine animals die each year from plastic waste alone. Fishing nets kill 1 billion to 2.7 billion fish each year. The first impact is human health. Albergin 23 reports fishery products are known to be an important source of microplastics in the human diet. If contaminated, their consumption can pose a threat to human health. Stress after exposure to microplastic induces an inflammatory response with the production that can lead to rejection. Microplastics can cause chronic inflammation, decreased organ function, and an increased risk of cancer. Second is extinction. Plastic Soup 23 reports plastic production will increase by 40% in the next 10 years. If we don't do anything, marine life will be irreparably destroyed. The plastic soup will endanger the food supply of millions of people. Corals that catch plastic have a 20 times increased chance of becoming ill. Indeed, Andre 22 warns, problems aren't in a void. They create a domino effect that ripples. Climate has played a role in every mass extinction. Paths are not limited to direct impacts of financial crises, conflict, and diseases that could trigger other calamities, and even a nuclear war. For all of these reasons, we're so proud to affirm.
Okay, is anyone not ready? Perfect. Fiona and I negate, and our first contention is the economy. The US economy is currently thriving, but any shift in middle-class job access will reverse progress. Guida in 2024 finds that the US economy expanded 3.1% in 2023. Closely watched measure of consumer sentiment on the economy surged to its highest level since 2021 as inflation has cooled to roughly 3%. A single-use plastic ban will put a ripple into the current economic order, as their 2022 finds to the American economy specifically. Banning the market of single-use plastics can only be a net harm. Plastics have become a significant part of the economy. The entire idea of rationing, restricting access to such a useful material such as plastic is unwise. Banning plastics will needlessly set back humanity's ability to prosper in a hostile universe. The government should not ban single-use plastics from a supply and acquisition chains. This could only do Americans more harm. This ban would impact government and private spending as well as employment rates specifically targeting the middle class. The State Chamber of Oklahoma states that there is evidence that shows that these bans have negative effects on the economy. Economic effects, business sales are affected negatively by plastic bans. Stores that were inside the ban area reduced their employment by 10%, while stores outside the ban area increased their employment by 2.4%. The plastic manufacturing industry employs more than 30,000 people. From bottles, packaging materials, diapers, cosmetics, and even microbeads and toothpaste, plastics have intersected every part of the economy, and a ban would deck every industry. Not only would it cause an economic standstill overnight, as a potential to cause an '08 level recession from the stock market shock. US economic decline causes global nuclear war. Mavic 21 finds that a second Great Depression will have implications for global security. Coupling global systems have enabled risk in one area to snowball into a full-blown crisis elsewhere. Banking, farming, health, and retail are intertwined. Economic stressors induce geopolitical realignments, with the US and China competing, ripples will be felt far and wide. Global economic wars escalate, collapse overcomes traditional barriers to conflict, as Suram and Polvov 19 finds that financial crisis could growing concerns about the increased possibility of large-scale military conflict. The current political landscape, prolonged economic crisis could spin out of control and morph into military conflict and world war. Contention 2 is healthcare. In the growing age of interconnectivity and safety, it is critical that the United States invest in their future, a future that will be filled with the clear cellulose of plastic. The healthcare industry is on the rise, admitting more patients. Insider Intelligence in 2023 finds that the U.S. healthcare industry accounts for over 18.3% of U.S. GDP. The U.S. healthcare industry is continuing to grow as the population swells. There will be 70.6 million RPM users in the U.S. by 2025, up 56.5% from 2022. The problem is that single-use plastics are the most widely used resource in the healthcare field. Yale healthcare professional Shelton in 2023 finds that medical supplies devices within the U.S. healthcare systems are being more single-use disposable on a daily basis. From the utensils we use in patient meals with things like blood pressure cuffs, patient and surgical gowns and linens, and even complex, expensive surgical instruments. Pandemics are on the rise as the Texas Biomedical Association Samantha Weaver states that infectious disease kills more than 17 million people a year. 30 new diseases have emerged in the past 20 years. For many of these diseases, there is no treatment, cure, or vaccine. More people will have weaker immune responses to fight off health threats. Economists and futurists predict by the year 2050, infectious diseases will be the #1 killer in the world. Without the use of safe single-use plastics, disease will spread. Alternatives cost lives. As Yale healthcare professional Shelton in 2023 finds, there are challenges to reusable items in healthcare because they need to be cleaned and tested before they are reused. There's less infection transmission from something that's disposable versus something that's cleaned. There is a national system for reporting medical device-related complications around infections. The use of single-use plastics is critical, as the Grotto in 2024 finds that one material that offers protection from these viruses and diseases are plastics. Thus, negate.
Starting with a quick breakdown of both cases, I think it's pretty clear that both sides are really structuring their cases in a way to really set themselves up favorably for the back half weighing debate. So obviously, the app is trying to link into arguments such as biodiversity as well as marine life And the same goes for the neg, where they're trying to read arguments that access impacts such as nuclear war or global pandemics. I think beyond that idea, there's also a few other strategic elements that I wanted to point out, which is number one, every single contention on both the AF as well as the neg had extremely specific uniqueness evidence that wasn't very general or very vague. So there was specific evidence included, such as fishing activities currently expanding by 4.5%, or the fact that infectious diseases are currently on track to be the number one killer by 2050. So I think the reason why that's so important for everyone listening and trying to structure their own cases is by having those strong uniqueness components for all of your different arguments, it sets you up very well for the rest of the round, whether it comes to frontlining, argument comparison, or generally just making your argument a lot harder to respond to overall. But I think second, more importantly, there's also very strategic to generally have preemptive frontlines embedded throughout your arguments. So something that the neg strategically did in their C2 was sort of bring up the fact that the alternatives to plastic is so much worse for human health. And it really does sort of take out any possible responses that the AF might have been originally thinking of. So it puts a higher burden on your opponents when you have those preemptive front lines. It also sets you up very well by having those strong cases, not just having strong links, but also like almost attacking the rebuttal before they even make those responses.
Ready for cross?
Cool. Yeah. Can I take the first question?
Sure.
Okay, great. You can start the time now. So on your first argument on the economy, you tell me that an economic argument is going to lead to nuclear war, right?
Yeah.
So let's establish the historical precedent here. When have we
Yeah.
even reached a scenario where nuclear war is possible through the economy?
Well, the last time we had a Great Depression, we didn't have nukes, Sam, which is why we didn't have a great nuclear war.
Okay, we had nukes, and that was one impact that you linked into.
Well, Great Recession is different than Great Depression, and we would argue that that was a bigger impact because it affected every sector of the economy, whereas the '08 was mostly affected the housing market and I guess like the stock market for like rich people, right? Affecting plastics affects every single person, specifically the middle class, which our Oklahoma evidence finds was specifically the cause of such a Great Depression. But can I have a question?
Go for it.
Okay, so let's talk about your argument about fishing. So is the US the only country that produces plastics? I just need like a yes or no. It's pretty simple.
No.
Okay, so are you aware that there are waves and currents in the ocean?
Yeah, no, of course.
So if I like throw some plastic in, I guess like if I'm like in China, like that eventually flows to like the North American like sea coast, right?
Yeah, well, that's not the issue, right? The issue is how we're producing this. And if we're looking at production, just simply put, the US produces more single-use plastic than any other country. So our impact does trigger.
Wait, but your argument is that there are microplastics in the ocean that hurt human health. But like, if the U.S. stops doing plastics, what about Canada? What about Mexico? They're also in North America.
Sure. Yeah,
and I
yeah.
guess their plastics probably also flow to the U.S. coastline.
A couple of things here. Number one, we can read evidence that isolates our impact. Like for instance, there are zones that are not touched by plastics right now.
Like which zones?
But second off, let me finish. Second off, we'd argue that the U.S. sets a precedent for other nations to follow. For instance, our soft power and hard power can lead to other nations. For instance, looking at regulations or looking at other treaties.
Okay, so can you give me an example of that, Sam? Like this, I feel like that response, like for example, the U.S. is democratic, so is every country democratic?
No, so
they're not. They're declining.
You can look at like literally any climate legislation that we've passed. For instance, when we look at the Paris Accords, we set precedents there. The moment where we saw
wait, what did the Paris Accords do? Give me one real policy the Paris Accords led to, because it didn't.
The one time we saw a decline in the Paris Accords was when we decided to pull out under the Trump administration. So our presence does invoke a huge amount of precedent for other nations. Can I have a question?
You can have a question. Yeah.
Great. Okay. You talk about the healthcare system. Let's just look at reality here. California implemented a bill to ban single-use plastics. What did they do with the healthcare system?
I'm not sure. I'm sure you can tell me.
Yeah, California decided not to ban single-use plastics within the healthcare system. Rather, they targeted single-use plastics, for instance, in the food industry.
Well, Sam, that would be really nice if the resolution was we should ban single-use plastics in the agricultural industry. But the topic is we should ban all single-use plastics. So guess what? The federal government doesn't have a choice because we're using the hand of God to fiat a resolution that's so stupid that you even have to say isn't actually going to happen.
Sure, that's cross.
All right. Is anyone not ready for rebuttal? It's just going to be straight down their case. Cool. On the argument on the economy, it's horrible. First, recessions are part of the business cycle. It's normal for them to occur and they will always happen. However, it's try or die for climate change, meaning action must come now. Two, it's not unique. Recessions are coming due to global crises. Latchman 24 finds that the economy is confronted with major geopolitical and economic downside risk at home and abroad. The Israel-Hamas war, the Houthis are holding the vital Red Sea passageway to the Suez Canal hostage. We appear to be on the cusp of a slow-motion train wreck in our $20 trillion commercial real estate market. Third, impacts on businesses are exaggerated. Wong et al. 22 finds that the negative impacts of the plastic bag ban on their businesses have been significantly smaller than what were predicted during the debate about the ban. Four, Turnit, single-use plastics hurt businesses. Meng 23 finds that single-use plastics can also be a disadvantage for businesses in several ways. Increased cost, reputation, legal and regulatory compliance, lost opportunity, outweigh this turn on probability. It's happening in the status quo, like Sam just said, in California. These are evidence comes from California, and businesses are doing bad there. Sorry, not in California, but in everywhere else in the United States. Fifth, Turnit, shifting towards sustainability makes businesses more attractive. Ton 21 finds that in a report exploring how consumers feel about single-use plastics. An impressive 93% of those interviewed felt encouraged to minimize their use of single food packaging, while 56% said they actively seek food products without plastic packaging. Multiple reviews show that millennials and Gen Z tend to find these matters more important than those in older generations, implying that aversion towards single-use plastics isn't something that's going to go away. Outweigh on time frame, and there's an immediate shift which causes increased money for businesses, which turns their impact because hours happen way before a recession. 6, Americans don't support single-use plastic. A ban will lead to more business support. From 23 finds that 73% of American voters support a stop in building new plastic production facilities, in addition to widespread support for policies that limit the use of single-use plastics. An overwhelming 82% of U.S. voters support reducing the federal government's use of single plastic. In the status quo, they want a ban. That means that if you do it, it's probably only going to help businesses. People are going to want those alternatives. On their second contentions, it has more holes than Swiss cheese. First, Turnit, negating leads to more health disparities from plastic waste. Durin and Lebud 22 find that disposal of healthcare waste is one of the biggest threats to global sustainable healthcare. Waste management in the United States is both unethical and unsustainable. In 2018, the United States produced 292.4 million tons of municipal solid waste. In the United States, 30 petrochemical complexes contributing to asthma, lung cancer, brain and organ damage, vomiting, diarrhea, and cardiovascular diseases. Hospital patients in the United States generate about 33.8 pounds of waste each day, which leads to about 6 million tons of waste annually. Of the 4,000 tons of waste generated daily in U.S. healthcare facilities, about 20% to 25% is plastic, but only 91% of plastic, including those used in healthcare, are not recycled and either reside in landfills or have infiltrated natural environments. Hazardous COVID-19 biomedical waste is contributing to plastic waste generation worldwide. The U.S. health sector remains largely tethered to make waste economy that extracts research, forms them into products and disposes of them. Outweigh on time frame, pandemics happen very sporadically. Meanwhile, diseases and problems like cancer are forever. They make it way worse. 2, Turnit, hospitals generate tons of plastic now, but abandon lines with sustainable alternatives for equipment and testing. New Gen 20 finds that the average hospital produces 25 pounds of waste per day per patient and generates over 5 million tons of waste per year. Plastic use in hospitals consists of PVC, which yields hazardous environmental effects due to its release of toxic chemicals into the air and water that produce major disruptions within the food chain. It can take up to 1,000 years for plastic to decompose in a landfill, which is where an estimated 79% of the world's plastic waste is disposed. In 2019, the FDA approved the Environ pouch, which is a reusable steam sterilization pouch meant to replace single-use plastics used to maintain sanitation standards. A, there's already alternatives for the healthcare industry, but B, outweigh this on generational trauma. It takes 1,000 years to decompose trash, or the impacts that they cause will last forever. 3, Turnit, hospitals contribute to the spread of plastic waste and toxic chemicals like PVC. Gibbons 19 finds that 25% of the waste generated by the hospital's plastic PVC that ends up in incinerators can release toxic chemicals. One study has linked early exposure to PVC in intensive care units to neurocognitive disabilities later in life. PVC can contain toxic chemicals. Young patients exposed to a common PVC additive called DHP during intensive care showed signs of neurocognitive decline later in life. To be better environmental stewards, hospitals and medical care facilities will need to reduce their plastic waste. This is a prerequisite to their entire case. The current plastic is a problem and plagues people even more unhealthy, but you can also outweigh on, once again, intergenerational trauma. Our evidence finds that PVC causes long-lasting effects, unlike current plastic, unlike a ban.
Moving over to the first rebuttal, it's definitely a lot more technical as well as flow-oriented in this specific round. But I think one thing that Alon does very well is he really captures exactly what a good first rebuttal should do. And that's to utilize all 4 minutes of your speech time to really just continue layering on very vast amounts of well-warranted responses on every single one of your opponent's contentions. So in this specific case, Alon only had to respond to 2 major contentions, which was the economy as well as healthcare. And as you can see, he had great coverage across the entire case. He was able to put around 4 to 5, even 6 responses on every single argument. And that's definitely going to be a very high burden for Fiona, who has to frontline all of that in her second rebuttal speech. I think in terms of any specific responses, one thing that can be very strategic for some of the viewers of this round to almost emulate and implement in their own practice rounds is Alon entirely read either Wang or Turns the entire speech for 4 minutes straight. He didn't really read that many delinks or non-uniques, and I think the reason why he did that was so that he could strategically force Fiona to respond to every single one of the turns that he made without allowing her to really kick out of any of these turns. So, for example, right, you can sort of see every single one of the turns is implicated and weighed in the sense of like prefer my turn on time frame, prefer my turn on probability, right? Or sort of setting himself up very well by doing that try or die narrative at the top of his speech. I think all of those different aspects are very strategic, and it's things that we can all sort of emulate when we're trying to really overwhelm our opponents in the front half and put as much offense as we can on the flow while making sure that every single turn is not blippy, still very well warranted, carded, and has very strong implications as to how exactly it interacts with their opponent's arguments and why exactly you should prefer his offense over all of the contentions that are brought up.
Okay, cool. So just be straight down their rebuttals and then I guess. Okay, cool. Southern Economy 1. Even if recession is not unique, the difference between now and then that we have global conflicts and tensions rising, that increases risk of conflict when you have a new recession, and that's why you prevent a recession. That's why it's try or die for us, but for us, we have warranty. They don't have any warranty on why it's try or die for them on climate change. But then two, it's too early to predict a recession. Prefer it's more recent, our evidence more recent. Sound like 24. The recession in America was expecting never showed up. Many economists spent early 23 predicting a painful downturn. Instead, the economy grew by 3.1% last year. It's early days to draw firm conclusions. It's very hard to forecast things in the first place. That means that their whole entire evidence says that we're going to go to recession right now. It's too early to forecast any of the stuff that they read there. But then three, their evidence doesn't respond to the warranty. It has a negative impact on job creation as jobs move outside of the ban area. So overall, businesses don't see impact. Overall, there's an impact to jobs, which leads to offshoring overall, which is what their evidence says, because people move away from the ban area because they need to have jobs related to the plastic industry. That also means that you can group all the terms together. They all say the same thing. It doesn't respond to the warranty that jobs move away from the ban area, which leads to a decline in the U.S. economy. Because remember that these jobs are critical to holding up the economy, because the plastic manufacturing economy makes up about 30%, 30,000 jobs in America. But that also loses a significant part of the American economy. We prefer because A, if the U.S. economy declines, it leads to nuclear war, which kills off everyone. But B, it's instant. The moment you affirm jobs move offshore away from the ban area. But 5, they say that Americans want to reduce plastics. The keyword reduce. That's happening right now, and a ban will be disastrous for our case. But then go to C2 on healthcare. 1, pandemics happens in 2050 before you see the consequences of plastic. You prefer because pandemics will wipe us out. It's try or die for us. Rational 23. The climate change is warming at a spectacular rate. Estimates suggest we expect 4 sextillion microorganisms to be released in the ice melt each year. With the sheer number of agent microbes being released, such outbreaks represent a substantial damage. A pathogen or emerging from the melting ice would cause catastrophic extinctions, which means that goes with intergenerational trauma and poverty. Because overall, pandemics are worse for developing countries. Because remember that there's overall a bigger crisis and worse, and they can't get access to vaccines faster under their world, which means that they overall harm developing countries, but also means that people who are impoverished right now are also harmed more by pandemics because overall they're unable to access resources in the first place. But then you could group turns 2 and 3 together. Alternatives spread worse toxins once they're disposed. Euro 22, alternatives to single-use plastics are worse for the environment, consume more energy over life cycles than their single-use plastic alternatives. More energy manufacturing, distribution, and utilization disposal means greater environmental impact. But then, Coda case. 1, sort of circular economy. 1, it can't solve their first 2 cards list every other plastic product and failure of recycling, improving circular economy fails. But 2, there's no link. Second, McCarthy authority is only about circular plastic economy, not a circular economy in general, means that other sustainable projects like competitives or alternative costs. But 3, Forceland and TCO don't have warrants or terminal impact. They don't solve it or factory farming. But 4, double bind runs out of energy or forces the shift to renewable. At Kirby 2021, a circular system creates waste and emissions, and energy required calls for a shift in renewable energy transition to be realized. Renewable energy costs resource wars, which outweighs on death. Claire 21, renewable materials are scarcer, demand will skyrocket, output will fall short, significant shortages leads to geopolitical struggles, with nations begin fight over supplies of critical materials, just as they fought over oil, will lead to a failure of worse than death. But then go to C2 on fisheries at the top 1. There's no impact. Their evidence is not on the context of American overfishing. It's about Asia, which means that they can't solve for any of the issues that they talk about because we're only resolving America plastic usage. But the second you research solves for everything that they talk about. Y24, white scientists discovered a chemical that can recycle recycle plastic in just 24 hours. The enzymes could assist in the recycling of single-use plastics could see such a larger reduction in the plastic taken in landfills and in nature. But then 3, they can't solve other actually cross that one. Go to microplastics. 1 is non-unique, but many single-use plastic doesn't affect microplastics pollutions. Microplastics come from other sources. EIB 21. Microplastics come from textiles, tires, and dust. City dust. These account for over 80% of microplastic pollution. But then go to fisheries. Do turn the alternatives are more toxic. CS 18. Plastic items are more sanitary than other alternatives. Reusable bags often harbor bacteria that could pose a health risk. I have time, so I'm just going to read the 5th turn. Offshoring. Reshoring is good right now in America because America has the best global plastic regulations that firmly causes companies to offshore to developing countries.
So when talking about Fiona's second rebuttal, I think there's a few things that I want to highlight in terms of really breaking down the round strategy behind this speech. So obviously, this is probably one of the most challenging speeches to give in this entire demo debate, just because of how much he had to cover. And I'll sort of break down what I think is very strategic about her time management and prioritization, which is something that a lot of people struggle with when it comes to second rebuttal. So first and foremost, she had to frontline basically every single one of the turns. There was like around 8 to 9 different turns that she had to frontline. And I think there's a few things that she did to make that a lot easier on her end. First off, when it comes to turns that are easily groupable, right, or turns that generally have the same topic, such as economic turns, she definitely found it very useful to just group them all and respond to them all at once. So she was able to successfully group all the economy turns and save a lot of time rather than having to go line by line and responding to them one by one. One thing that I do want to mention is, especially when your opponents are reading such well fleshed out turns that are not only well warranted, but also have a lot of implications, you can sort of notice that Fiona also responded to the implications themselves and almost provided her own weighing, such as like time frame and the fact that her recession is a lot more instant, whereas the time frame for the turns are not as instant. So one thing that I do want to sort of emphasize is when you are frontlining, if possible, try to also respond to the implications that your opponents made to really destroy all paths that your opponents might sort of blow up in summary later down the road. I think beyond that, when looking at how exactly she responded to the AF case, we can also see that number one, she was able to budget enough time because of the grouping to successfully give good coverage over the C1 as well as the C2. And as a whole, I think she does have a good mix between having responses on the uniqueness, which we've sort of established before, is incredibly strong, but also having enough turns in offense that she can easily sort of allow Daniel to go up in summary and like blow up as well. So I think when it comes to second rebuttal, the most important thing is efficiency. And while there are less implications in the second rebuttal, she still does a good enough job to provide Daniel with enough responses and turns to be able to go for in the summary speech, which is really what you want to do when it comes to having a good second rebuttal.
All right. Are you good for a cross?
Yeah.
Cool. On your, or wait, let me start the time. All right. On like the front line that you read that it's too early to predict a recession, when's that evidence from?
January 26th.
Who's the author?
Jaina Simlak and Ben Castleman.
What's the warrant?
The warrant? The warrant is
Yeah.
that like last year, everyone predicted that there's gonna be an economic recession right now, but instead the economy grew 3.1% last year, and then and also
essentially the warrant is that recessions can happen whenever, so it's pretty hard to predict if your impact will ever happen.
no, it says that economists have a long history of getting their predictions wrong too.
So why are your impacts not wrong?
Why are our impacts not wrong?
Yeah.
We would say a couple of things. One, ours is not a prediction, ours is an actual action, right? Because what happens is historically jobs move offshore, right? So that's not a prediction, right? We're not predicting that jobs will move offshore. We're just saying historically this is actually what happened, right? Secondly, we would say that your evidence is asking, hold on, let me finish. Your evidence is like a prediction, right? Because your evidence is predicting that a recession will happen versus our evidence that states what's happening right now, which is a good economy and will happen later after the action.
Your evidence is just a prediction that in a post-AF world, a recession will happen. It's still a prediction.
It's not a prediction. It's just what historically has happened.
It's a prediction.
Move out of the area.
A prediction that a ban will cause a recession.
Okay.
Okay.
Also,
Cool.
Sure. Let's go to your side of the let's talk about circular economy, right?
Sure.
So what about the other resources in the circular economy, right? That are
Like,
plastic, that are still like
like what?
toxic, like
Like
steel
what?
and iron.
Yeah, sure. There's companies, for example, UBQ, which is an emerging startup that was recently in the Time Magazine's top 50
Okay,
startups that gets rid of all household waste and basically
so
creates a circular economy really quickly through things like steel and metal. They're able to process that and create a thermoplastic solution.
okay, sure. So like let's talk about that, right? So that requires us to rely on renewable energy, right?
No,
Why not?
because UBQ doesn't use renewable energy. They
Okay, wait, but
basically break
in a
down.
circular economy, right, you can't use things that will produce toxins, right? And you have to replace that energy, right, that is used to
The
recycle, right?
circular
So
economy is
how are you
basically
going to
just
use like what energy are you
means that we recycle. It basically just means that we recycle more. I'm not sure what you need renewable
okay,
energy
if it
for.
means
Can I
that we
take a question?
recycle more, right, then how is it how okay, if it means that we recycle more, right, like all of your evidence specifically says that like every other plastic product, right, is sorry, every single one of those plastic products that like is in your evidence, you cannot like recycle it, and it just overall proves that like you have no way of recycling these products. So at that point, like
You can most definitely recycle a non-single use
wait,
plastic.
but
Like
like
that's just
that is like what your evidence says. Like your evidence says that the plastics on like that, like your evidence in all those cards, like basically states that like plastics cannot be recyclable. Like those plastics. Yeah, that's not.
Let's start the time now. On the AF case, their only offense here is two things. First, they double bind. They say that renewable energy is bad. Our argument is not about renewable energy, but the fact that you can switch from a single-use economy to a circular economy. That does not talk about renewable energy whatsoever. Their term does not apply here. The second thing they tell you is that offshoring happens. First, there's no evidence in warranting or impact for this argument whatsoever. You're not considering it. But second, we say U.S. regulations will still take place abroad, like we've seen in every single instance where we pass climate legislation. At that point, good or C2, that's what we're collapsing on. Their first response says that it happens in Asia. No, our evidence specifically on North Americans, how that growth rate is the fastest in the world. Second, they say that there's research that solves the argument. Their research doesn't solve anything. That research has existed for decades. The issue is that big businesses in the status quo can simply circumvent that research from even reaching regulations or products. We say the only solution then is when you actually cause the ban to happen and fix the market economy. The third response is there's microplastics from other nations. Their evidence is from 2021. We say the situation has changed where the US is a dominant player here. But second, it doesn't solve for anything. None of their evidence even mentions the fact that there's fishing in their evidence. Their fourth response is that other alternatives are worse. However, number one, again, their evidence doesn't talk about fishing. But number two, they assume that more sustainable alternatives aren't used enough and used for their lifetime. However, they've still conceded our warranty on C1 that we change to a circular economy, so we emphasize things more and more sustainable use. I've addressed their fifth response on offshoring. At that point, extend our argument. We say that right now, fishing is growing by 4.3%, and it's largest in North America. This contributes to billions and billions of plastic waste into the ocean. However, the WISE Error 23 evidence says that a ban solves this argument by saving our ecosystems and health. This is critical as 2.7 billion fish die every single year from plastic. And we say this one solves health problems, which go into our bodies, cause cardiovascular problems and things like cancer. But number two, prevents extinction, which is an impact that is 100% conceded in the round. We tell you from our evidence that we do nothing, marine life is destroyed. This cascades into things like financial crises, recessions, and nuclear conflicts, which is all conceded at the top of their case. At that point, we say we're outweighing on strength of Lincoln to things like extinction, which they again read. With that said, let's go to their case. A couple things. First, their response to all of our terms is just that the offshoring happens. One, the warranting is not there. But number two, we argue that this is only a subset of percent of businesses that can even offshore. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars to even offshore to other nations or leave your locality. That means they've conceded all of our warranting on these terms. That number one, plastic hurts big businesses and businesses in the status quo because they have to focus on things like regulation. That turn is conceded. They also conceded our turn that 90% of customers feel encouraged to choose sustainability products, which means that if you choose banning single plastic use, you increase the US economy dramatically, which solves back for the recessions that they talk about. All turns here are conceded. We say this always on time frame, which also gets conceded because this is an immediate impact that happens versus their US recession, which is never predictable. On the second argument, healthcare, a couple things. Number one, they say pandemics are going to happen at some point. There is no time frame on this whatsoever. In fact, even pandemics happen elsewhere, this means that the US healthcare system never solves. That's why you focus on the US solvency right now, which they've considered our turns here. For instance, we said that sustainable alternatives allow us to avoid things like PVCs, which cause food disruptions and cause waste management problems that create things like cancer, create deaths across the world. We say again, this outweighs on time frame because we saw back for present harms to the US healthcare system, whereas they only focus on one thing that could happen in the future. For those reasons, so proud to affirm.
One thing that I really enjoyed about Sam's first summary is how thorough his frontlining is. And I think it's a really good example of what sufficient, effective frontlining should look like in a very ideal first summary speech. So if you really observe how he tried to frontline in this scenario, he was able to be very efficient without having to group a lot of the responses, which I think is extremely interesting. So when we look at what he did specifically, he made sure to address all of the turns on his C1 circular economy. And once he was able to win his circular economy point, he almost cross applied that to address some of the other turns, such as fishery alternatives that were applying to his C2. But I think overall, you can see he integrated evidence comparison, a lot of uniqueness cross application to really solidify the fact that his C2 comes out on top, even with all of the responses that Fiona is putting in her second rebuttal. And I think that's something that we can all sort of observe, learn from, and try to implement in our own speeches as well. Moving on to how Sam attacks the cases of his opponents, I think one thing that we should also sort of take note of is the fact that in his summary extensions, he doesn't merely just repeat what Alon mentions in his rebuttal. He's consistently adding additional implications as well as almost adding value to the responses when it comes to a summary. So I think the most important things to sort of highlight is the fact that, he blew up a lot of the different aspects, whether it's the time frame, weighing on the economics turns, but also sort of taking that big picture approach when it comes to healthcare as a whole and sort of mentioning how his turns on pandemics solves back for the present harms of the entire US healthcare systems. So I think what's most important is when you're trying to extend responses, especially turns in your summary speech, a lot of what people tend to do is they just almost repeat verbatim what was brought up in the rebuttal. I think what Sam does, and is a really good example of what people should do, is not only do you repeat/extend the argument that was brought up in rebuttal, but you always take it one step further in a sense that the summary speech is adding value. It's consistently strengthening that turn in a way that really puts everything into perspective, right? Like, how exactly does this turn on pandemics play into the grand scheme of the healthcare system? Right? And how exactly is that a unique reason as to why the judge should prioritize the turn on pandemics over the C2 argument on healthcare industry with current plastics?
Okay, so the order is going to be the AF case, and then it'll be the neg case. And then I'll go to offshoring at the very end if I have time. Okay. Oh, shoot. Sam uses a circular economy argument to respond to basically every argument in the round, but he conceded a D-Link that circular economy isn't possible because not all products are circular. For example, can you use a condom twice? Probably not. It's not a circular argument. That means that they have no way they can solve for every possible argument, which is that all the economy turns on their our case don't matter anymore. But that we're going to go for the disside of renewable transitions. We say that the attempt to make a circular economy is bad because it causes transition wars for the materials to do so. They say that their evidence doesn't say so, but we read the evidence for them that the circular economy, when you try to recycle plastic, involves the use of renewable energies to do that. For example, in order to make things like synthetic leather, which are alternatives to plastic and makes things circular, you have to use high amounts of energy, which causes people to go to transition to resource wars in order to gain those materials. That outweighs because there's clean conceded impact and conceded link, basically, which leads to all-out war across the globe, which outweighs your argument because one, in a war, you lead to a lot of things like oil spills in the ocean, which means that fishes all die because of oil spills and whatnot. Like blue ocean and deep blue ocean also causes massive amounts of death, and it also means that we just lead to war faster because takes a long time to happen, whereas the renewable energy transition happens immediately because of the fact that you have to sustain an economy that is currently dying because there's no more plastics. But then on the contingency about fishing, the first response we're going for is that other countries are going to always cause overfishing and they're going to cause even worse problems. They give you response as North America has the highest growth rate, but call for their evidence. Their evidence says that North America has the highest growth rate of new fishermen. That does not matter at all because our entire argument is that the plastic reduction is higher in other countries, which would inevitably cause there to be overflows of plastic in every part of the world, which means that the U.S. stopping plastic production has nothing to do with the overall biodiversity loss of fish, which means that their argument is not unique. The second argument we're going for is the microplastics argument that says that microplastics come from other sources. Their response tells you that other countries don't matter, but that's not the argument. The argument is that microplastics don't come from things like single-use plastics. They come from things like multi-use plastics, for example, that are inevitably thrown out. But that counts for 80% of all microplastics, which means that their argument is terminally non-unique. With that being said, let's go to our case. On the contention about the economy, there is no terminless impact to economic growth because they have conceded that recessions aren't inevitable and won't happen, which means that all their turns don't matter and they have no impact. They don't weigh these turns, and their only turn is long term, but there's no terminless impact, so you can't vote off of it. And we're all going for extinction arguments anyways, which means they can't access extinction. But goes to the contention too about healthcare. They read you responses telling you that the first response tells you that a pandemic will happen inevitably in other countries, which means we should solve back for the U.S. healthcare system. That we'll agree to that and concede that. That means that the start of a pandemic is non-unique, which means that all the arguments leading to the start of pandemics, for example, toxic chemicals, don't matter because they're just reasons why pandemics start. Our entire argument is that we can prevent the pandemic from causing all-out extinction in the United States because we have things like healthcare systems that are usable from plastics that make it so we don't have absolute extinction, which means that if their returns are non-unique, that means the only way you can vote is solvency, and the only solvency of the round is our argument because the argument causes for the cause. With that being said, we can extend our argument that banning microplastics prevents the healthcare system from working because the majority of the healthcare system involves using plastics to treat things like healthcare, and if you use things like syringes multiple times, it causes the spread of disease, which also turns their arguments about the pandemic, which means that we cause a pandemic which they have conceded will escalate to affect other countries and, worst of all, cause extinction. The biggest way you can just make the distinction in the argument round is that their returns are just about causes of pandemics, arguments about solving pandemics, which means that you always weigh our solvency over their terms.
Daniel's second summary is a really great example of how you best integrate round strategy, round vision, and overall comparative analysis to save yourself time, but also really solidify your side as the winning team. So we can sort of break it down one by one. He starts off by addressing the turns simply by weighing, right? When he's addressing the economy turns, he's saying at the end of the day, extinction comes first, these global impacts comes first. Recessions are always cyclical. That's something we both agree on. It saved him so much time. Instead of having to go through and respond to them one by one, he just quickly conceded to it in 5 seconds that economy does not matter in the context of this round. And he went on to focus on what was important, which was really pandemics. I think one thing that I do want to highlight is how exactly this comparative analysis comes into play. Just because there's so much clash and so much back and forth between the AF and the neg at this stage of the round, I think Daniel does a wonderful, phenomenal job at really breaking that clash and making it clear to the judge what exactly their side does to better settle the problem at hand. So to really emphasize and contextualize this a little bit more, right? At the end of the day, what Daniel proposes is a very simple, statement, which is pandemics will happen no matter what. This is something that both sides agree to. So we should be prioritizing the team that best solves for pandemics in the coming future, right? And then he does a lot of great work in terms of articulating exactly how the neg does that a lot better than the AF. And I think that's something that a lot of summaries should implement when it comes to settling the clash, right? Especially when it comes to late stage, back half overall speeches, being able to settle the clash instead of just repeating back and forth what your front line was or what your response was will go such a long way in terms of really showing the judge why you're coming ahead.
Yeah, you're ready for cross.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Alon, why don't you take the first question?
You got it, Sam.
Okay, sure. Cool. Great. So, Daniel, one line of logic you have in your argument is that we're like, for instance, on the circular economy argument, that we're not banning like everything in this economy, right? My question then is, in the context of like how I frontline, how does this even apply? Because if we're, for instance, using a circular economy with things that are replaced from single-use plastics to something that's reusable, would that not still exist? Like, would that not be viable under a circular economy within the plastic realm?
We impact turn it. Like we say that the alternative to in order to make your economy circular, for example, in order to turn certain plastics into like reusable things, you have to use things like synthetic leathers, which your evidence cites, which cause high amounts of energy usage,
so no,
which
I'm not
causes
addressing
resource wars.
My question is not on that. It's just on this idea that our line of logic is contingent on us achieving a fully circular economy. We're just illustrating that that's not the case, that our argument is just based on us replacing single-use plastics to things that are more sustainable.
Wait, that's
fine,
but
we responded to that. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, like even if it's just like you're just replacing single-use plastic, like that's still bad because that still causes shift to renewables because you still need like a lot of amounts of energy to be able to like recycle all those like products. So you need to be able to have that, and that causes that shift to renewables.
Okay, you can have a question.
Okay, so let's talk about your fishing argument. So you say that the US has the highest growth rate of fishing. Why does that matter?
Because well, first off, it's not just that we have the highest growth rate; it's that we also produce the most amount of emissions, and single-use plastic.
Which
But
card
obviously it
says that?
wouldn't
Can you
matter
read me a
because
line? Like the most amount of single-use plastic that's being produced by any country is China by far.
sure, but like even if that's true, we're not like the U.S. is a huge amount of single-use plastic. Like we cannot
I
discount
don't
what
even
the U.S. is
think we're
contributing.
5% of the global single-use plastic markets because we outsource most of our single-use plastics to like developing countries, for example, that like will sell to other
So,
countries
okay,
inevitably.
first, this is a new warrant that we're going to
Well,
outsource
no,
it.
no, the
But second,
argument that
if
I
we look,
made was just that other countries
Daniel,
produce.
sure, but Daniel, if we look at your response that was read in rebuttal and summary, none of this contextualization is ever done, right? The only kind of logic we get in this rebuttal
That's
and
because your
extension,
only response,
sure,
your
but
only front line is that quote, North American has
Daniel,
the highest growth rates.
yeah, no, I understand that. Even then, right, you have to do the work of contextualizing why your response matters. Insofar as your really only line of logic is that other nations will produce microplastics, that isn't sufficient for you to win
Wait,
our case
so
or have the
my
evidence.
logic is that other countries produce plastics that cause biodiversity loss and edible extinction. How is that not a contextualized enough response to win impact defense to your case?
Yeah, a couple things. Number one, you never actually give us any numbers on how much is being produced in other nations. You only say, like, for instance, Fiona's response
You
in
don't even tell me
rebuttal
how much is
was
produced
that
in the
our
US.
evidence is
This is
Asian.
your contention. How
Yeah,
much is being produced in the US?
we
Give me
say we're the
percent.
largest problem in the US. We don't give you numbers, but yes, we contextualize it as the US is the largest issue.
You literally conceded, like in the question earlier, that that's not
But
even
we
true.
didn't. We did not.
Oh,
No, that's gross though.
All right. Is anyone not ready for final? It's going to be my case, their case. All right, cool. On the double-blind, first, no, that's not true. Our evidence is literally only about the plastic circular economy, which is literally what they point out, and their double-blind evidence is not about plastics. It's about things like renewable energy and other types of energy, which is circular economy, not about plastic circular economy. But two, their impact evidence on this turn doesn't even talk about a specific number. They just say it causes death, but don't let them give you an actual amount, and they also don't extend our impact in the last speech and let them do that later in the round. At that point, extend our second intention. It's pretty simple. Fishing is increasing by 4.3% yearly in the United States, and Abergini 23 finds that microplastic is happening mainly through fishing. The only way to solve this is through a ban. Specifically, Macknight 21 finds that 100 million marine animals die each year from this plastic, which can cause a lot of health problems. But specifically, we find that when you have microplastics and people eat these fish, it causes things like increases in cancer. Their first response to that plastic reduction increases in other countries. That doesn't matter if we go for our first impact, which is what we're going to go for. I'll get to that in a second. Their only other response is that there's other sources of microplastic. They just say that they don't respond to Sam's frontline, that their evidence is from 2021. All our evidence is from 2023 and finds that most of the microplastic is coming from single-use plastics in the status quo. So clearly we have changed in the past 2 years. At that point, extend our first impact on human health. It's really simple. When you have things like microplastics, you have things like increasing cancer. Weigh this in 2 reasons. First is probability. It's happening in the status quo. You have people, you have increasing cancer in the status quo, and also weigh this on intergenerational trauma. When you have things like cancer, that's something that affects the entire family, both monetary-wise and health-wise, which means that it comes first on your ballot. At that point, go to their case. They're losing here immensely on the terms. It's really simple. We say that plastic waste through things like dealing with pandemics causes increased waste, which means that our turns are an inherent prereq to every single one of their arguments. It's pretty simple. When you have to deal with pandemics, you have increased waste and increased usage of PVC, which causes chemicals. That's really important because when you have more of this, it's a lot harder to treat people that are suffering from pandemics to begin with. So if you have people suffering from, for example, cancer and other diseases, they can't actually deal with the problems that the pandemics causes on them, which means that we're the only actual sovereignty on making sure that pandemics response works. In order to have possible pandemics response and solve for any single one of their impacts, you have to also be able to treat these patients for every single other illness they have. For example, during COVID, the people that died the most were people with preliminary causes, which are only what we solve for. You only have an extinction if you don't have those preliminary causes. The only chance of actually solving the second contention is for the affirmative.
Now we're finally into the first final focus, right? And I think what Alon really demonstrates is the entirety of final focus should almost revolve around weighing and comparative analysis. At this point of the debate, it's so far progressed that I think frontlining and sort of backlining become a lot minor issues. And I think really focusing on why you win that big picture comparative in terms of what is the most important issue we should prioritize is really what final focus speakers should train and really practice leading up to various tournaments. So seeing how exactly Elon does that for the first final focus, right? You can see one, he really sets it up extremely clearly in terms of why exactly fishing outweighs in the entire round through probability, right? How infectious diseases are increasing in the status quo, as well as doing time frame weighing as to why his issues are a lot more intergenerational in comparison to the short-term issues that his opponents bring up. But I think also more importantly, when you look at the way that he tries to respond to the pandemics argument as well, right? He's always adding on additional analysis when it comes to implications. So the turn that they choose, that Elon and Sam choose to extend, is the same turn from summary all the way to final focus. But you can see that the final focus is a lot more focused on the implications of how that turn interacts with pandemics as a whole, right? For example, it is a prerequisite to pandemic solvency. The fact that there's more waste in hospitals makes it so much harder to treat pandemics, right? Makes it so much harder by overburdening hospital resources, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what that really goes to show is that when it comes to final focus, as long as you're still extending the same arguments, please don't hesitate to give on new analysis when it comes to implications, or give on new additional reasons as to why you're just coming up ahead when it comes to that comparative debate for solvency, or general weighing mechanisms like probability, time frame, etc.
Okay, cool. It's just gonna start on their argument of overfishing, and then it's just gonna go on the double bind stuff, and then pandemics effect time. Cool. At the top, they can see the defense that other countries are overpushing right now, and they don't solve for anything in terms of like Asia and East Asia, which means that they can't resolve any of the issues in revolving of overfishing because they can see that they're the ones causing the most issues revolving that. But then onto the double bind, they can see that like our evidence is about any circular system, so including the plastic system that they talk about, which means that you have to go to renewable energy because any circular system requires a lot of energy and means that like you have to shift away from traditional energy methods because you can't use traditional energy methods in a circular system. That means you could go for our impact because we extended that it creates a resource war scenario because because renewables require like really rare resources, which means that countries scramble over these resources, which cause a resource war. This goes first for everything else because these conflicts tend to be more likely to escalate in the first place, which goes nuclear. But the first is one is paradigm for us on urgency because that means that like when there's nuclear war, that everyone dies, but two is worse for people with cancer because remember that nuclear winter results with like people with results of chemicals in the atmosphere, which means that overall like people are more likely to develop cancer under their growth. But then go to our setup. But they extend this. Actually, I'll go to overfishing too really quickly. They say on market pretzels that our evidence that is outdated, but like it's 80%. Obviously, like our evidence is for 2021 too. Like I don't see why it's outdated. Okay, cool. I'm going to the side of the pandemic one. They said that like they say that like overall there's people with cancer that's gonna increase. But when we say that's like the long term, at that point when both sides agree that diseases are increasing right now and that there's a higher chance of disease, which means that overall you need a healthcare system to make sure that things are sanitary, which don't happen under their world because to get rid of single-use plastics, that means that overall they harm people they harm people more. Also, it leads to extinction too, which means that like people with cancer like obviously don't matter when like everyone's going to die. And also the cancer thing, like yeah, it's like long-term impact versus like something that's happening right now in the status quo, and it's more urgent to solve for this because it leads to extinction. Cool. I do have to extend healthcare. I feel like I extended it well enough. It's fine. I can extend it more. Okay, cool. On healthcare, healthcare relies on single-use plastics to keep things sanitary, which they don't do under their world because it bans all single-use plastics, which means that there's no chance of actually keeping things like sanitary, which is bad under the pandemic because that leads to more infection and more chances. Yeah. If its healthcare system also doesn't exist, they can have cancer solved too. Cool. Sorry.
All right, good round. Enjoyed it.
Good round.
So for our final speech, the second final focus, I think what's really cool is we can sort of compare the way that Elon delivers his final focus as well as the way Fiona delivers her final focus. So Elon is a little bit more focused on the overall comparison, the weighing aspect, and I think Fiona generally tends to structure her final focus speeches more so around voters, both of which are very, very good structures, and the viewers can sort of utilize which structure best appeals to their overall style. But I think one thing that we can definitely see Fiona give an example of is how exactly you blow up these big voters in the final focus. So I think the biggest point of emphasis for the neg in this final focus speech is really emphasizing that turn on circular economy and really implicating why that circular economy turn directly sort of links into every other piece of offense in the round. So in this scenario, the circular economy turn about resource wars becomes one of the biggest voters on the neg. And I think it really does give a great example of, how exactly do we blow up these big, clear issues that we want to convey to the judge, right? So one, directly explaining how exactly it's very undercovered, right? Two, linking that into nuclear war, as well as like linking that into the other issues such as cancer and infectious diseases, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this format is also a really great way for people who generally try to structure their overall final speeches around the key reasons as to why the judge should vote them up. I think both structures of comparison or voters work very well, and I think Ilan gives a great example of how comparative final focuses should be delivered, and I think Fiona gives a good example of how voter final focuses should be delivered.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching that round. If you want to learn with these amazing instructors and amazing debaters, please come to Libertas from June 24th to July 8th. Thank you so much.